Okay, so Impact Wrestling Slammiversary is about less than a month away. It's about 3 weeks or so away, isn't it? And as we get closer and closer, we're going to be talking more and more about which names are going to show up at Slammiversary, of course. Now, obviously, it was the same that happened last year. It's the same thing that's happened this year. WWE released a load of pro wrestlers, a load of superstars, a load of talents, a load of employees. They've been doing it really ever since, but certainly they released a load of WWE Superstars back in April. Now, whenever you're released from a WWE contract, you have a 90-day non-compete clause if your contract isn't set to expire before then. So in most of the cases of the talents that were released back in April, they have a 90-day non-compete clause. Now, the reason why people think this is going to associate with Impact Wrestling, of course, is because these 90-day non-compete clauses expire right before Impact Wrestling Slammiversary on July 17. So lots of people are excited. Impact Wrestling, in the same vein as they did last year, have teased a plethora of former WWE superstars to come over to the company. And as I mentioned, people are looking at last year as an example of what Impact Wrestling did and expecting even bigger and greater things this year when it comes to Impact and when it comes to Slammiversary. Now, last year, as I mentioned, WWE, right after WrestleMania, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they released a plethora of WWE superstars, office stars, furloughed agents, employees, etc. And actually, this actually benefited Impact Wrestling. This actually benefited their Slammiversary event, because what Impact Wrestling started to do, they started to promote all of these former Impact stars, many of them, but also ex-WWE superstars, to return to the company at the Slammiversary event. We saw teasers for the likes of Aces and Eights, Super Eric, EC3, the list goes on and on of all these names. I actually have done a video about the names that returned or debuted for Impact last year at Slammiversary, so be sure to check that out. But obviously, again, we saw all of these teasers, and quite a few of them did come to pass last year. They teased the Good Brothers signed of Impact Wrestling. They teased EC3. EC3 did return to Impact Wrestling at Slammiversary last year. They teased Super Eric. We didn't get exactly Super Eric, but we did get Eric Young. So a lot of those teasers in the end did pay off. So obviously, given the releases by WWE this past April, right after WrestleMania once more, people once again said, well, it's going to be very interesting once we get to July, once we get to Slammiversary, which former WWE stars do indeed come over to Impact, which former WWE stars do indeed sign with Impact Wrestling. I've been saying for weeks at this point, not that I have any insider information, but just logic. I think logic is a good way to look at it, that we're going to see at least one former WWE star, one name that was released by WWE in April at Slammiversary in July. Otherwise, I mean, the logic is that you can't promote all of these former WWE stars, you can't hype and tease all of these names and not deliver at least one. I don't think anyone's expecting them to deliver all of their teasers, because we've seen the teasers, right? We've seen the teasers of Samoa Joe. Of course, we know that's not going to happen, but we've seen the teasers of Chelsea Green, the Iconics, Daniel Bryan, the Forgotten Sons. The list goes on and on of all of these names that Impact Wrestling have teased. And you can't do those promos, you can't do those vignettes without delivering at least one, because it's false advertising, and fans, you would lose any sense of trust and credibility that you have with fans. You just can't do that. So we know that at least one is coming. Well, my long-winded point here is that we do finally have some updated news when it comes to possibly some outside names coming into Impact for Slammiversary. This is a report by Fightful Select, which is really broken in the last 20 minutes or so at the time of recording. It's a very new story, so you're going to have to bear with me, because I'm kind of reacting to it in real time. I really wanted just to get this out as soon as possible, because it's a big story. So this is the report by Fightful. I'm going to read it verbatim here. So they have said, quote, Impact Wrestling Slammiversary has quickly gained the reputation as being a place where free agent names will pop up after it happening last year. Now, Fightful has been able to confirm with Impact sources that at least 2 surprises are planned for the show, with outside names making their way into the company, including one already under contract elsewhere and one recent WWE release. We're going to talk on that in a second, because I think that's a really big detail. Fightful have also been told to expect, quote, a reinvigoration of the Knockouts division in July. So certainly there's a lot to break down in there. Now, let's break down that first little chunk there that I think is absolutely fascinating. And that's the name that's 2 surprises are planned as of right now. That will probably change, I would assume, as we get closer and closer, maybe even more, who knows. But at least 2 names, 2 surprises are planned for the event. Now, again, it doesn't go into details as to who they are. It would defeat the purpose of a surprise, of course. Doesn't include Steve Macklin. Of course, he's already made his Impact Wrestling debut, so it's not going to be including him. The really interesting part of those 2 surprises there is that one is already under contract elsewhere, because that certainly really narrows the field. If you look through, and you have to you almost have to do a bit of a filtering process, if you will. Anyone that appears at Impact Wrestling Slammiversary would have been released by WWE. If they're a former WWE star, they would have been released by WWE before April. April 15 obviously was the day that all of these talents got released, but it would be April or before. That's when these talents would be released by WWE, because that's when their non-compete would be. So you can filter that in. So I don't think any of the talents, obviously none of the talents that were released by WWE a couple of weeks ago, none of those are coming. None of those are coming to Impact Wrestling. They may do later on this year, of course, but as of right now, they're not coming. They're still serving the 90-day non-compete clauses. So the rumors of the likes of Aleister Black, who I think is going to AEW, there have been reports to suggest that, or Braun Strowman, or Buddy Murphy, or whoever, or Ruby Riott, those names, Lana, could you imagine Lana at Impact? Any of those names, they're not coming to Impact Wrestling as of right now. The reason is because they're still serving those 90-day non-compete clauses. But if we look at the names that were released by WWE in April of this year, the report by Fightful stating that one is already under contract elsewhere really does narrow things down a lot. Because if you look through these names, how many have already signed contracts elsewhere? And as far as I'm aware, there is only two that I can think of. One is Mickie James. I think we know at this point that Mickie James has signed a contract with the National Wrestling Alliance. We know that, of course, because she is producing that NWA Empower all-women's pay-per-view. The response, I guess, the National Wrestling Alliance response to WWE Evolution, to WWE not doing a second Evolution pay-per-view. We know Mickie James is the executive producer of that. We also know that Mickie James is wrestling the following night for the National Wrestling Alliance at the 73rd anniversary pay-per-view event. So logic would suggest that Mickie James has signed a contract with the National Wrestling Alliance, with the NWA. Why could it be her? Well, obviously, there's been a lot of teases about Mickie James and Impact Wrestling over the course of the last week or so. One, we saw a big tease on Impact Wrestling last week when we saw a backstage segment with Kiera Hogan and Tasha Steelz and Rosemary and Havoc. In a brawl that ensued, Kiera Hogan was thrown into a garbage can. As she's getting up, she removes a trash bag, and the trash bag says Mickie on it. Now, obviously, that was referring to Trash Bag Gate a couple of months ago, where Mickie James was released. She broke the story on social media that her belongings had been sent to her by WWE in the form of a trash bag with her name on it. It was terrible. Subsequently, Triple H, Stephanie McMahon had to publicly apologize to Mickie James. Mark Carrano, who was a senior figure in the talent relations department, been with the company since the late 1990s, was also fired from his role in talent relations because he was deemed responsible for that. And subsequently, we found out that had been happening for years. Several talents, mostly female talents as well, had come forward and said, yep, I got my belongings in the post as well via a trash bag. I think it was Chelsea Green came out and said, yeah, not only did I receive my belongings in a trash bag, but I also received Lana's in a trash bag as well. They sent the wrong trash bag to the wrong person. It was terrible. Now, since then, obviously, since that tease last week, we've also seen Mickie James tease a plethora of matches against current Impact Wrestling knockouts on social media. We did this video yesterday. Such names include the current Knockouts champion Deonna Purrazzo, Kiera Hogan, and a former Knockouts champion in Chelsea Green, who has been heavily rumored to return to the company. We'll touch on that in a second when it comes to a surprise for Slammiversary. So I think Mickie James, it's safe to say she has signed a contract with the NWA. Potentially, she could be the name that is already under contract that is planning to be a surprise for the show. Now, you could say, well, there aren't many other people that are already under contract elsewhere that were released from WWE in April or earlier this year. There is one other name, though. One other name that I think is very, very, very exciting. And that name is Andrade El Idolo, because we know Andrade, he was released by WWE back in March. He didn't have a 90-day non-compete clause, and he has already signed a contract with AEW. He made his debut appearance on Dynamite a couple of weeks ago on Friday Night Dynamite. He's being managed by Vicky Guerrero. He also is going to be competing for AAA. He's going to be challenging Kenny Omega for the AAA Mega Championship at Triple Mania in August. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that that he has worked out a deal to make an appearance for Impact Wrestling. We do know, because it was reported, the report is out there, that Andrade did have negotiations with Impact Wrestling. Now, reportedly, a snag in the negotiation process came down to the amount of money guaranteed up front and the amount of dates. There was discussions about creative control, and Andrade wanting creative control on his character and all that kind of stuff. Reportedly, Impact were willing to give that to him, but it was the issue about a guaranteed amount up front and the amount of dates, etc. Obviously, AEW, if it comes to a bidding war, they're always going to win. But there was also a discussion, and it was actually mentioned in that report, discussing when Andrade was having these negotiations with all of these companies, Impact, AEW, Ring of Honor, etc. One of the points it did make is that it was very close at one point for Andrade to come in and make a one-off appearance. So what I am thinking is possibly Andrade may have reached an agreement to come in, maybe for one night only, or maybe for a couple of matches or something like that, that was agreed prior to him signing with AEW. Because again, that report by, I think it was Raj Giri over there at Wrestling Inc., did mention that a deal was close at one point for a one-off appearance. I would suspect that probably would be for something like a Slammiversary. So it's certainly, that is an interesting one, because they're the only two names that were released by WWE earlier this year that are already under contract. Now, obviously, some people might say, well, Samoa Joe is currently under contract at WWE. Once again, he's on the NXT brand. That certainly is true. I don't see a scenario where Joe comes in to Impact Wrestling or Slammiversary. The only way that could work is that if Joe had agreed something and signed something before he went back to WWE and NXT, and he said, look, I've agreed something with Impact, I've agreed to make an appearance at Slammiversary, I've made that agreement, I'm committed to that date, obviously I'm going to be with you going forward, I'm going to be with WWE and NXT going forward, but I agreed and made that agreement to appear at Slammiversary before you re-signed me, so I'm going to appear there. I think that's unlikely. Obviously, in logic, logically, that could make sense theoretically, but I think that's unlikely because that would imply that Joe would get physical at Slammiversary, and as far as we're aware, he hasn't been medically cleared, even by WWE's team, or maybe even his own doctors. I don't think even he knows his true medical status right now. If Joe was completely 100% medically cleared, had no issues, he would have never have gone back to WWE. He would have signed with AEW because he would be wrestling. Even if he was medically cleared and he had gone back to WWE, he wouldn't be on the NXT brand. He would be on Raw. He would be on SmackDown. So I don't see a scenario where Joe agreed to do a match for maybe Impact or maybe an appearance, I guess, a promo or something like that. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I just think that's unlikely. I think the more likely name of the person that is currently under contract that is going to be showing up at Slammiversary as of right now, looking at the names that were released by WWE back in April that have signed deals with companies since then, it's Andrade or Mickie James. Now, I might be missing out names. You can let me know in the comment section below, but I just can't think of anyone else. I don't know if you can. From the top of it, I've been racking my brains for the last few minutes. And again, you have to exclude the people that were released by WWE a couple of weeks ago because it's certainly not them because they're currently sitting out those 90-day non-compete clauses. So it's not going to be them. Now, as far as going back to the report, as far as looking at other surprises that have been teased, they did mention there that one name making their way into the company is under contract elsewhere. We spoke about that, probably being Mickie James or Andrade. And another one they're saying is one recent WWE release. So again, you then have to look at the names in April. Now, I know people will say, well, they said recent WWE release. Does that mean, when you say recent, does that mean someone like in the last couple of months or the last couple of weeks rather? No, it's not going to be. The only name that possibly could be might be an Alexander Wolf. Obviously, he didn't necessarily get released. His contract expired. He was just told by WWE, we're not renewing your contract. That's not out of the realm of possibility there. So that could be a recent WWE release, I suppose. But if you look at the verbiage that was used for his WWE departure, he was never truly released. His contract was just not picked up. So again, I don't know if that would be him, but I have said in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if he came in, considering Violent by Design is led by Eric Young, and they have history going back to Sanity, and I don't think we're done adding members to Violent by Design yet, so I think that's a possibility as well. I do think that's a possibility. Other names that when you say recent WWE releases, so again, if you look back on, if you take WWE recent releases as the names that were released in April, then it does open up the possibility of some names. I think the most likely name is Chelsea Green, to be honest. And again, we've seen the rumors, we've seen the reports talking about Chelsea Green, that she has been in discussions with Impact Wrestling. She's been in discussions for a while. She has been the name that I have said from the beginning, if you had to pick one name out of all of those names as the one that is the one Owen that you think is guaranteed, but is the most likely to go to Impact Wrestling, it would always be Chelsea Green. That was always the name that I said I think is the most likely, because I think everything there just makes sense given her history with Impact Wrestling. She's a former Knockouts champion as Laurel Van Ness. She has a relationship with Scott D'Amore. Of course, her fiance is Matt Cardona, who does work with the company as well. So there's so many foot in the door scenarios there. And on top of that, we already have the report saying she has been talking to specifically Impact Wrestling. Moments after her release by WWE in April, Scott D'Amore quote tweeted and said, "I remember a crazy ditch bride in Impact Wrestling." He was referring to Chelsea Green. So again, I look at it as she is the most likely name. So given Fightful's, again, their language there by saying that it's a recent WWE release, I certainly would say Chelsea Green is a real possibility, and I think that's the most likely scenario, that it is Chelsea Green. Obviously, there are other names that it could be. I've said before that Kalisto, I think, would be a fantastic addition to Impact. We know that Impact are doing a renewed focus on the X Division. That started all the way back in January with the Super X Cup tournament, all the way to now, where we've had an Iron Man match that lasted 60 minutes a couple of weeks ago between Josh Alexander and TJP. We've got an Ultimate X match coming up at Slammiversary as well. We've got really big plans and real big push and momentum on the X Division going forward in Impact Wrestling. So getting someone in like Kalisto who would fit that division perfectly would be a major signing. So you can't rule him out. We spoke the other day about Wesley Blake. I think Wesley Blake absolutely, once again, is a possibility for Impact Wrestling for several reasons. Obviously, the most likely reason is the Forgotten Sons reunion with Steve Macklin. Steve Macklin, former WWE Superstar, was released by WWE back in February of this year, has subsequently made his Impact Wrestling debut in the last couple of weeks. We've seen the vignettes. We saw his debut last week on Impact Wrestling. Wesley Blake did an interview with Sportskeeda recently where he spoke about the wanting to reunite with Steve Macklin, whether that's in Impact Wrestling, whether that's on the independent scene, whether that's wherever. He wants to reunite with him. Why? Because he feels there's some unfinished business there, and I don't think he's wrong. They twice got on the main roster as a tag team, one as the Forgotten Sons, one as the Knights of the Lone Wolf, and both times it got pulled away for various reasons out of their own control, and that doesn't certainly seem fair. I think Wesley Blake and Steve Macklin, for that matter, would like to prove things right and prove that WWE were wrong for ditching them in the first place. Now, whether or not they do come together as a tag team will remain to be seen in Impact Wrestling. I think Steve Macklin, it looks to be pretty content, and I mean, it's early days, but Steve Macklin looks to be pretty content doing his own thing. Obviously, his character is definitely a spin-off of The Punisher. There's no doubt about that. So time will only tell with that one. Time will only tell. And finally, you know, the name that obviously a lot of people will be talking about, especially when, again, you look at the final line of this report by Fightful Select. The final line of the report once again says, quote, Fightful has also been told to expect a, quote, reinvigoration to the Knockouts division in July. That would imply, of course, we're going to be seeing a lot of new faces in the Impact Wrestling Knockouts division, as I mentioned. One of them being Chelsea Green, which I think is pretty much nailed on at this point. The other name would be, I guess, Mickie James, possibly. Again, if that's the name that's already under contract. So that's two names in the Knockouts division. Of course, the other one that people would be talking about would be the Iconics. They trademarked the name recently as the Inspiration. I saw someone mentioned in a comment on the video that we did talking about the Iconics and trademarking their name, that was done through the AEW lawyer. I don't know if that necessarily means anything, again, because you have to look at it. Obviously, it could mean something that they're going to AEW, but also Peyton Royce knows Sean Spears, who probably knows that lawyer. And it probably would have been a case of, do you know someone that can help you with this? Sean Spears went, yeah, of course, use this lawyer. So I don't know if we can really read too much into that. I've said for a while now that I think the Iconics, or the Inspiration, whatever you want to call them, coming into Impact, I think is the right move for them. I really do think that's the right move for them. I think, yes, they could go to AEW. And they did an interview on the Busted Open radio show recently, which I think was quite telling. And they said, look, we're going to stay as a tag team. That's one thing. I think some people were considering how they were split up in WWE and they were doing single stuff. Were they going to continue doing single stuff? They said, no, we're going to be a tag team. That's what people best know us as. That's how we've worked for years and years and years. We're going to be a tag team in our post-WWE careers. So given that they're going to be a tag team, Where is the company that has female tag team championships? That's Impact Wrestling. Yes, they could go to AEW. Yes, they could be an asset to the women's division, but the AEW women's division isn't getting the spotlight that the Impact Wrestling women's division is right now. It just isn't. Now, AEW's women's division has improved, don't get me wrong. I've been highly, highly, highly critical of it in the past. I think justifiably so, because I still think there's still massive flaws in that division they need to address in terms of how they book it, how many matches, segments on the show, meaningful storylines, etc. But they are getting there. When you had Double or Nothing, the build up to Double or Nothing with Britt Baker and Hikaru Shida meant something. The match got a lot of time. I just want to see more of that, and I'm yet to see more of that. And while you have an EVP that on certain calls says not all matches need storylines when referring to women's matches, I have my concerns. On the flip side of things, you have a company like Impact Wrestling. Since the Knockouts division was created, it's been a cornerstone of the company. It's always featured in multiple matches, multiple storylines. They got Knockouts Championship and Knockouts Tag Team Championship as well. So, again, if I'm the Iconics, yes, you might make maybe more money in AEW, but if I'm looking at opportunity and I'm looking at a place where I can really help grow a division and I'm looking at somewhere where I can compete as a tag team, get creative license, I think it's an easy decision. I really do. So I think when Fightful are being told they expect a reinvigoration of the Knockouts division, I think they're probably saying Chelsea Green, Mickie James, the Iconics. That's 4 big, big names, and suddenly Impact Wrestling's Knockouts division suddenly is reinvigorated overnight or in one night, if that is the case. So that's certainly very, very interesting. But of course, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the new news about Impact Wrestling Slammiversary, the surprises, the free agents, the outside names that are reportedly set to debut? Who do you think that person is? You can let me know this in the comment section below. Who do you think that person is that is coming into Impact Wrestling but has already signed a contract elsewhere? Let me know in the comment section below. Look, guys, as always, smash a like on the like button as well. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings, get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe as well. Bottom right-hand corner, click the notification bell. You'll be notified when we talk about WWE, Impact Wrestling, AEW, whatever, any form of pro wrestling gear on the channel. I forgot my list there, but I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.